Back at the start of this series, I told you that I set out with the intention of killing Vermeer off as the artist responsible for this painting. For 3 years, despite some extraordinary pushback from him, common sense told me that it was surely a forgery, and I felt quite affronted that someone would paint Vermeer's signature on it not once, but twice. But when I eventually found the name of the forger, I was surprised to find myself disappointed and more than a bit confused. Welcome back to Vermeer's Child for an episode that I would rather not have to make, because I'm going to accuse an artist of an unspeakable art crime, and then I'm going to also defend him from that accusation. Back in late 2022, I was convinced that the painting was genuine. I'd found no significant red flags and instead had a shopping list of elements that supported it being authentic. The painting was so Vermeer-like that a forger would first have to be an expert on Vermeer to have painted it. But it was also a very strange painting. There were things that weren't in the De Hoog version. The floor seemed to have lots of bits of broken silver thread, but even with those, some of the shapes looked intentional. While looking at this area, I found yet another signature, J. Henry Inskip. John Henry Inskip was a well-known Yorkshire artist based in Scarborough on the east coast of England. He was born in 1864 and died in 1947. I was able to track the trajectory of his career through newspaper articles, from receiving school art prizes to studying at the Scarborough School of Art to regularly exhibiting at the Royal Academy to generally positive reviews, and finally a retrospective art show held after his death at which some previously unseen works were displayed. Inskip was a landscape painter who painted relatively small, expressive works depicting bucolic, dreamy and sometimes dreary scenes of the Yorkshire countryside. He used muted colours, often with a palette knife. He appears to have only rarely painted interiors. So why would he copy De Hoog and put Vermeer's signature on it? And where would he have gained enough exposure to Vermeer's paintings to copy his style so effectively? The first thing he would have needed was access to the De Hoog painting or a photograph with some colour information, given that this was the age of black and white photos. Well, we know that the De Hoog version of this painting went on public display when the Wallace collection opened in London in 1900. Before that, the painting might have been known from black and white photographs. But the Wallace art collection was housed privately in Paris until the early 1870s, and the painting was only purchased in 1865. So it would have been relatively inaccessible to the Yorkshire painter until 1900, when he was already 36 years old and had been exhibited at the Royal Academy for 14 years with a well-established style that had been positively received. It seems a strange thing for an artist to do, paint a completely different style of painting, and why put Vermeer's name on it and then still sign it yourself? I thought that perhaps if I looked at this from the Vermeer angle, it would make more sense. It's believed that Vermeer could ask prices of up to 600 guilders for his work during his lifetime, but 20 years later, when the Decius auction was held in Amsterdam, the top price had dropped to 175 guilders, which was paid for the milkmaid. Over the next couple of hundred years, Vermeer was only known of in small art circles before his major rediscovery in the 1860s. An example of his anonymity is evident from the sale of The Girl with the Pearl Earring in 1881, which was bought for 2 guilders. After his rediscovery, there was initially a lot of confusion between his works and the works of other Dutch old masters, including Metsu and De Hoog. But one by one, from the late 1800s into the new century, his works were teased apart from the works of other artists. His rediscovery coincided with large amounts of American money seeking to buy art, resulting in the sensation of Americans snapping up Vermeer's time and again to ship back home. This loss of art to the old world was particularly a big story in England, as London had become the city through which many of these paintings travelled. So the big money that was paid between 1890 and the 1920s for Vermeer's provides the incentive for forgers, but you still need extraordinary skill and exposure to his paintings to be successful. I suppose Inskip could have travelled to Holland, but if he didn't, the best exposure would have been when a major exhibition of Dutch art was mounted at the Royal Academy in early 1929. Vermeer's Little Street was one of his 8 paintings in the show. But the major problem with John Henry Inskip being a copyist forger is that by the start of that exhibition in 1929, he was 64, well regarded, and lived in a handsome house on the Scarborough seafront. He seems rather long in the tooth to be starting a career as a forger. I just couldn't find any realistic indication that Inskip would have forged the painting. So I looked back a bit further to see whether there was a logical connection between the Lever Gallery, which had sold it to the person who took it to Africa, and Inskip, whose name was on the painting. You'll recall that Lever Gallery on their receipts and advertising stated that the business was established in the Midlands in 1895. The Lithuanian Jewish family had initially emigrated from Lithuania to Wales in about 1893, so the move to establish a business in Burton-on-Trent a couple of years later fits. John Henry Inskip's father, John Inskip, was a photographer who appears to have established studios in a number of towns. He is first mentioned in the newspaper as opening a business under royal patronage in Sheffield in 1864, the same year his son was born in Scarborough. The 50-mile distance between Sheffield and Burton-on-Trent is about as close as the two families get geographically, but apparently Inskip the Senior was, like the Levers, also an art dealer. In 1876, when his son was 12, Inskip Senior advertised the sale of a large number of oil paintings to be held in the town of Pontefract to make way for alterations to his Scarborough premises. Knowing that the father was buying and selling art, and the son was at that time a talented student at an art school and later establishing himself as an artist, it seems likely that the junior Inskip would have participated in the business, perhaps by undertaking art restoration works for his father. The young Inskip hasn't done a great job on my painting. He's painted lines that don't match the tile joints, and presumably he's responsible for the white overpaint. Close examination of his signature shows that the paint he used has bled into the cracks on the painting, which is a sure sign that the cracks were there when he painted the signature. So Inskip didn't paint this little painting, and he shouldn't have signed it, but I suspect he was very young at the time and was probably pressed into service by his father. No doubt it was well before 1886 when at 22 he was first exhibited at the Royal Academy. What happened to the painting after the Inskips, and whether it made its way directly to the Levers, is something that proper provenance research will need to uncover. So who did paint it? Well, I can tell you something more. I've now told you about 3 signatures, 2 being possible Vermeer's and 1 Inskip signature. And the order I found them was the order I disclosed them to you. But what I didn't tell you was that about a year after I bought the painting, I also found something else. I found a name painted on the front of the painting, painted so small that neither Inskip Junior or Senior would have seen it, and perhaps no one else ever saw it or was meant to see it. But that's a story for the next episode. After that episode, we're finally going to look closely at the painting, so you'll be relieved, no doubt, that we're getting to the main event. Thanks for your patience, and please subscribe if you haven't, and consider giving this story a thumbs up so YouTube tells other people about it. As always, thanks very much for watching.